Okay, let's begin. First of all, we want to wish everyone a very special Hag Sameach, a Hag of Kabbalat Torah. We should all be zocheh to expand our knowledge, our keeping of these mitzvot, of these ma'asim tovim, which is really the hallmark of what this day is really all about. So let's begin. We are on Daf Yud Chet Amud Aleph 18a3. Maybe let them know that we've started the Zoom on the chat, if that's okay. Okay, so we are up to the Amar Avitul Safra. Remember that? So the Gemara said as follows. So the last statement from Avitul Safra that kind of took us down this rabbit hole is where he said, Safa mizavit lezavit. A mustache is able to be trimmed from side to side. So in other words, from across the line of the lip, because that's where it gets in the way of the food. And then Rav Ambi said, Safa me'akevet, only if it's getting in the way. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, for me, the whole mustache is already considered something that gets in the way. The Amar Avitul. So once we've said something in the name of Avitul Safra, we're now going to continue with other things from Avitul Safra. Now, I need Ray Chira here today. I'm shouting out Ray Chira. We need to post in the group as well. Ray Chira, where are you? Today's class is just for you. The Amar Avitul Safra. Avitul Safra taught, Mishmed Rav Papa, in the name of Rav Papa. Paro Shaya Bimei Moshe. The Paro that was in the days of Moshe. What do we mean Paro was in the days of Moshe? Paro was like a name like Caesar. It was a name like emperor, governor, president. But many different people held the title of Paro. Okay? But Paro Shaya Bimei Moshe, the Paro that was in the days of Moshe, Hu Amah. He was 1 amah tall. He was 2 feet tall. Okay? Zikno Amah. And his beard was 2 feet long. Which means that his it's dragging on the floor, obviously, a little bit, because it only starts by his chin. Upramashtako Amah Vazeret. And his manhood, was an amah and a pinky. So it was a little bit more than an amah. So this man is 2 feet tall with a 2 foot long beard and a 2 foot long, how do you call it?
After the bris? Yeah.
There was no bris involved. Okay? Now, l'kayem mashine'emar, in order to express what it means, ushfal anashim yakim alea, that God, when He appoints kings over men, a lot of times He chooses a leader that is the lowest of the low. The Chachamim explain that what we're talking about over here is not just a particularly well-endowed paro, right? Especially, to size, but beyond that, the concept of Paro was that he was a person who was short in stature. He was a diminutive person, not just in size, but in his actions. Napoleon complex, exactly. And he has a very long beard, indicating the beard is a sign of respect, and that beard represented that Paro, his arrogance and his kavod, was 2 feet long. Now I said earlier, if you're 2 feet tall and you have a beard that's 2 feet long, then your beard is dragging on the floor this much, right? Obviously, because it starts on your chin, okay? So his beard is literally dragging on the floor, indicating that his beard was longer than he was. His arrogance, his kavod, was longer than he was. And it was his kavod that was dragging on what? On the floor. What dragged him down to the earth was what? Was the fact that, number one, he had a kavod issue. Number two, he was a person who wasn't particularly a good person or an impressive person, but a person of that height, who is not important, who's also the king of Egypt, develops this Napoleon complex where he needs to be bigger. He could say to God, Mi Hashem asher eshma b'kolo. Who's God? Who's anybody? He's forced to live with this kind of experience in the way that he speaks. Ushval anashim yakim alea. What's the idea of his member being that long, of his manhood being tu amah? The concept is that we know Egyptians were steeped in immorality and adultery. So the idea over here is it being expressed that Paro, as their leader, was the chief of being steeped in immorality and adultery. Okay? Now, whether or not this is something which is true also physically, or not true physically, only metaphorically, is up for interpretation. But there's no question that on the highest level, that is what it means. And how do we know that? that the Gemara doesn't mean to say it specifically physically, because the Gemara brings ushfal anashim yakim alea, and the lowest of men did he put upon it. It does not mean that God only appoints leaders to kingdoms that are short, but it means that kings were often very lowly people with very low morals and values, killing people, doing whatever they wanted, from that position. Ve'amar Avitul Safra, Mishmed Rav. Avitul Safra said in the name of Rav, Paro shaya bimei Moshe amgushi haya. Paro that lived in that time was amgushi. Machloket exactly what that means. Shineema, like it says, Hine yotzeh hamayma, that he's going out to the water. Now, if you look elsewhere where we describe this idea of Paro amgushi, it's described as either of two things. Either Paro was a sorcerer, and that's what the pasuk that Avitul Safra is bringing, that he went down to the ocean to be able to practice his sorcery, okay? And that was where he was doing that. The other opinion is that it's not that he was a sorcerer, but rather that he was a person of particularly high arrogance. So take a look over here, Rashi in the small letters, Amgushaya, Pluktei Masechet Shabbat. It's about half the weight in the thick lines at the bottom of the Rashi, small Rashi. You see? This is where I'm looking, right over here. Can you see it? Right there. Okay? Says Rashi, Amgushaya, Pluktei Masechet Shabbat, Machloket Shabbat. Manda Amar Amgushi Gidufi. He was a person of such arrogance that he was a blasphemer. He was blaspheming against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shemegadef et Hashem. Lakach yotzeh hamayma shemishtabeach atzmo ve'omer yo'or li v'ani asitani. He would go down to the river and he would say, this river I created, v'ani asitani, and I made myself. There was no one who created me. So the blaspheming was part of the fact that he was machzik atzmo be'eloha, considered himself to be a deity, a god. Why did he have to go down to the water if he considered himself a god? Because Paro would never go to the bathroom, ever. What would he do? He would wake up early in the morning, he would go down to the river, enter into the river as if he's this holy being, relieve himself there, okay? Then hold it in from then until the next night, the next morning. So the people were not allowed to accompany Paro. Paro would go to the river ostensibly to dip in the mikveh or bathe, but what was he really doing? He was hiding the fact that he had human needs. Okay? So two opinions as to what Amgushi means. One, that he is a blasphemer, he was someone who considered himself God, and the other is that he was a sorcerer. The Mishnah continues. The Mishnah says that a person is allowed to do laundry on Chol HaMoed if they come back from overseas and they're unable to they were not able to do it beforehand because they were traveling from overseas. Just to remember, we already saw the machloket. What does it mean that he traveled to overseas? Was it for necessity? Was it for business? Was it business that was necessary or business that was extra? So we've already seen that before. But be that as it may, the Mishnah says if a person comes back from overseas and they're able to do laundry. Something we already saw before. Someone only has one shirt. He's able to wash that one shirt on Chol HaMoed. Why? Because the whole reason why you're not allowed to wash on Chol HaMoed is because you should have done it before. He couldn't have done it before. He was wearing it before. He only has one shirt. So when's he going to need to wash it? When it gets dirty. So the halakha is, a person that only has one shirt, he's allowed to wash it on Chol HaMoed because the gezerah that you should have washed it before makes no sense. Mati Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, the Mishnah says, who's allowed to wash? If you come from Medinat Hayam, if you were a prisoner, if. It gives a long list of things. But what does it not list? Hani'in, these yes. It doesn't say, but if someone has one shirt, he's able to. So if the Mishnah is telling you these yes, what's it also telling you? These no. So the ones that are not listed, only having one shirt is not on the list. If that's the case, so how could you say, Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, how can you say Rav Asi that he's allowed to wash it? The Mishnah seems to exclude it by omission. Please only answer amen if you're listening to this live. Baruch atah Adonai. Elohim melech haolam, she'akol nivaro. Amen. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yaakov said to Rabbi Yirmiyah, let me explain it to you. Matninan afagav itle tre umitanfe, says the Mishnah. The Mishnah that tells you that you're only allowed to wash if you came back from a trip, if you got out of prison, if, that's talking about when a person has two. But when a person has one, we never made any conditions. Because in every scenario where a person has one, they're able to wash it. So you're asking me from the Mishnah seems to exclude it by omission, because it tells you all of these are allowed to wash, but nobody else. Answers Rabbi Yaakov, it's not a question. The Mishnah was telling you when a person who has two tunics is able to wash it. Okay? Now, we're going to review just one little piece over here on the washing of the beged. If you remember, we explained last time that there was a reason why you're able to wash when you have one tunic. Anyone remember what it was?
Was it the same thing with only one shirt?
Yeah, only one shirt. Do you remember what the reason why we gave why a person's allowed to wash if they only have one shirt? Why aren't we worried? Sorry?
Anything to do with lending in the collateral or no?
No. We gave a reason. So we just said the reason because there's nothing he could have done. But the question we asked was, but then anyone else who's watching won't know. So all the things that we said was asur because people who are watching are not going to know the difference. Why are we not worried that when they see someone washing his one cloak, that they're going to learn that you're allowed to do washing on Chol HaMoed? So we answered at the time, Ezuro mochiach alav. The belt tells the story. Because at the time, what would happen is when they were washing their shirt, they would wear like a big overcloak or a scarf or whatever when they were washing their one shirt. So what would the guy do? He would take the belt off the shirt and he would put it around himself. So when the guy's washing, if you see that he's wearing his belt on his cloak, you'd know that the reason why he's doing this is because he only has one shirt. If he would have had two shirts, he would have taken the belt from shirt A and put it in to tie shirt tunic B. Because he's wearing it on top of his cloak, so anyone that passed by would know that this is a one cloak type of guy, and that's why he's able to wash it on Chol HaMoed, so we weren't worried about it. The second answer of Ezuro was not that he's wearing it, but if he did not have another tunic to put it in, so he would wash it with the belt attached. Now you're thinking about a leather belt. Yet their belt was also material. So it went through the loops, but it was also like a tie. Like you ever see, like that's what they would wear back then. So that would also need to be washed, but it would need to be washed less. So when the person would switch tunics, they would swap it from tunic A to tunic B. But if he didn't have a tunic B, what did he do? So the first answer was he wears it. Second answer is no, he washes it with the shirt. So when you're watching the guy wash the shirt, you'd see that the shirt was washed with a belt on it. And therefore they wouldn't get mixed up on this halakha. It says the Gemara, Shalach Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yaakov bar Giyurei, Mishmed Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Yaakov bar Giyurei, said the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Klipishtan, mutar lechabsan b'cholosh hamoed. If a person has objects of clothing that are made specifically out of linen, he's allowed to wash them even on Chol HaMoed. Why? What's the logic? Because linen clothing gets dirty and soiled much faster, so therefore it's like you only have one cloak. Since it's automatically going to get dirty again, so what's the gizera? Gizera is you should have washed it before. Well, even if I washed it before, I'm still going to need to wash it again because of how easily it gets soiled. So therefore, says the Gemara, Yochanan said you're able to do it. Mativ Rava es mitpechot hayadayim. You have hand towels. Mitpechot hamisparaim. You have the towels of the barbers. So they get dirty very, very easily. Now, ostensibly, these are made out of linen, says the Gemara. And if they're made out of linen, and the Gemara and the Mishnah took the pains to tell you, these linen items you're able to wash, what do you learn from that? From a mission? That not all other linen items. So linen towels that have hand towels that are always being dealt with, and linen towels that are used by the barber. Those are the ones that we have a reason to say that are mutar. But these, you don't have a reason to say that they're mutar. Klipishtan, lo. Any other linen garment, no. Amalei Abaya said, Matitan afilu b'sharmini. The Mishnah was not talking about only linen. He was talking about towels, hand towels, and barber towels of all sorts. So therefore, on those things, which it's including wool and cotton, which that would not be the halakha for other clothing, we specified these two objects. But if it was linen, true, even a regular item of clothing, you'd be able to wash on Chol HaMoed if it was made out of linen. Amar Bar Yedeya. Bar Yedeya said, Lididi chazidi yama shel Tveria. I saw, when I went down to Tveria, I saw the waters over there. I saw the people all going down with their big washing baskets, and they were filled with linen clothing. So obviously it's mutar because I saw all the people doing it. Says the Gemara, Matkif la Abaya. Abaya asks, what are you talking about? Man lemanan. Who told you the B'Ratzon Chachamim Avdi that the people were doing it because the Chachamim allowed them to? Dilma shelo B'Ratzon Chachamim Avdi. Maybe the people were doing it because they were doing the wrong thing. You're bringing a proof from beachgoers. You know, I saw the people at the beach in Tveria were doing this. So what? Okay, you should learn from that beaches of Tel Aviv what you're allowed to wear. Says the Mishnah as follows. The Mishnah continues now, and we're talking about cutting hair and kibus. Now we moved on to the next thing. There's an isur of writing on the holiday. Okay, person is not allowed to write on Chol HaMoed. Okay, says the Gemara. And these are the ones that are allowed to write on Chol HaMoed. Kiddushin Nashim. Okay, we're gonna go into what each of these mean in the Gemara, right? But we'll just translate them straightforward for now. The Gemara says you could write Kiddushin Nashim. You could write a shtar that sanctifies a woman. We know a woman is acquired b'kesef b'shtar b'biyah. So if you sign a shtar in marrying this woman, you'd be allowed to write that on Chol HaMoed. V'gitin and divorces. V'shovarin and receipts. V'daitiki and someone's about to pass away, so you're writing out a will. Matana, a present that you're transferring ownership of something. Pruzbu, that you're giving over a debt to Beit Din so that Shemitah doesn't take it off. Igrot Shum, when they're evaluating a field or an inheritance and they're saying that this is how much this is worth. So therefore, this person gets this, other people get the other thing. Igrot Mazon, a letter that's obligating oneself to pay Mazon, to pay for food for someone. The example that's given is if a person is marrying someone and the person is marrying them on the condition that they're going to sustain their children from the first marriage. So that's someone that he doesn't have an obligation to feed. So he would sign, say, I am committing myself to the money that it would cost to feed those his stepchildren. Shtarei chalitza or miyunim. If you write a shtar that someone had chalitza or miyun, that they were denied or turned away, or refusal in another case. What's the case of miyun? Miyun is in a certain case where someone was married off by the older brothers or the wife after the father passed away. So the bride was not yet, was a young bride, and they would marry them off. But the halakha would be that she had the opportunity to be mima'en. She was able to say no to the kiddushin that were being suggested for her by her brothers and her mother after her father died. So if she was mima'en, if she said no, and then she'd be allowed to marry somebody else, there's a shtar there. Bishtarei birurim, a certificate or a shtar, a contract of birurim, of selection. When they selected one dayan to rule over a court case. Gizerot Beit Din, when the Beit Din would want to write down a gizerah that they were instituting in the community. The igrot shel reshut, and as well letters of the government. That is the Mishnah in its entirety. Now let's just be clear. We started off by saying that what is a person allowed to do on Chol HaMoed? They're allowed to do a melacha, which protects them from a loss, but now which brings them a gain. So the Mishnah over here is operating on that idea. Kiddushin Nashim, what happens if I don't give her? What happens if I don't give her the shtar? Should have put a ring on it, right? If that's what you want, maybe someone else will take her now. That's loss. So that idea runs through the whole thing. Gitin, we allow him to write a get. What's it talking about over here? The general cases where the person is going away for war or he's going away for extended business trip, they used to write their wives gitin on condition. If I'm not back by this day, then this counts as a get. Why? So God forbid they shouldn't drown at sea, and then their wife would be aguna, she would be unable to get married because he wouldn't know what happened to her husband. So those soldiers at the time would write their wives gitin, so that if God forbid they disappeared, then their wives would be able to remarry. And that was considered something which, obviously, if you didn't let him write it now on Chol HaMoed, it would be a tremendous loss. Shovarin, same thing. Each one of the cases in the Mishnah follows that concept. someone's coming to pay back a debt, and he says, okay, I'm going to pay you back, but I need a receipt. And you tell him, I can't write a receipt. It's Chol Moed. Because like, I'm not going to pay you back without you writing for me a receipt, because then you'll claim that I never paid you back and I have to pay the debt again. So if the guy now leaves, or the guy loses the money that he had to pay the debt back, I'm going to lose that. I'm going to lose the money that I lent him. So in each scenario, that's the situation. We're talking about a situation of loss. Says the Gemara. Shmuel says, "Mutar le'ares isha b'cholo shel moed." A person is allowed to marry, to betroth the woman, to engage a woman cholo shel moed on chol moed. Why? Shema yikadmenu acher. Because if you don't put a ring on it, maybe someone else will step in, offer to marry her, and she'll accept his offer of marriage because you're dilly-dallying and you're not sealing the deal. Now let's just be clear. What does erusin mean? Erusin then does not mean what erusin means today. So erusin usually we think it means engaged, but by engagement in today's standards, there is nothing. There's no requirement of engagement, no kinyan of an engagement, right? So for us that really means nothing. But by them, it actually didn't work that way. The way it worked was they would first have erusin, and then they would have nisuin. Oftentimes, from erusin to nisuin was a year or 2 or 3 or more.
Whoa.
Now that woman would now be mi'ureset, engaged to marriage for him. If, God forbid, she would have an affair with someone, the death penalty for adultery. Why? Because erusin is like a form of marriage. But the husband and wife can't be together until they get the nisuin. And that, by the way, is so interesting. You know, you could hear something 50,000 times and not know what it means. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, what's the first beracha of the marriage? Right? Right? Baruch Asher, right? She'asar lanu et ha'arusot. V'hiti lanu et ha'nisuot lanu al yidei chuppah v'kiddushin. God forbid us to be with our arusot lanu, v'hitir lanu, and He allowed us, right, to be with those women al yidei chuppah b'kiddushin, when the kiddushin happens. Right. So there was a moment of erusin that happened first, and then there was a second part of that marriage. Usually that year would be spent, the person would be making enough money, setting up the home, all the things, so that he could then bring her into his home. And that was really what today we do with yichud, is the concept of the man bringing the woman into his space, where no one else is there. That's what the yichud is meant to replicate on some level. Okay? So, the Gemara says, Shmuel is telling you, if you don't allow him to get engaged on cholo shel moed, what's going to happen? Shema yikadmenu acher. Someone else might do it. Now we're going to discuss already at a later point over here why, or actually I don't know if we're going to discuss today, but we'll come back to this. Why would I have thought that that's not allowed? What about the erusin process is not allowed that Shmuel needs to come and tell you, oh no, you're allowed to do it. You're allowed to do it on Chol Moed, so you don't lose her. Why should I have not been allowed to do it? What is asur about the act of erusin? So we'll come back to that. Gemara says, let's prove what Shmuel just said. Let's prove what Shmuel said from the Mishnah. You're allowed to write in the Moed, Kiddushin Hashim, to sanctify a woman. Doesn't this mean Shtarei Kiddushin, which means that you're able to betroth the woman, right, with a shtar, like I said to you earlier, right? How is a isha niknet? A woman is acquired through kesef shtar biyah. So if she's acquired through shtar, so when I'm writing the shtar, what does that mean? I'm acquiring this woman for kiddushin. So if kiddushin nashim means that, if that's what it means, so if we let you write it on the holiday, obviously it means that we let you give it on the holiday. What would be the point of writing it and then waiting to give it till after the holiday? So if I allowed you to write it on Chol HaMoed,
You have to give it on Chol Moed.
then obviously you're giving it on Chol HaMoed, because otherwise, if you're giving it after Chol HaMoed, we would just tell you to write it after Chol HaMoed. There will be no purpose in writing it only in order to just hold it for later. Gemara says, Lo, shtare psikta. We're talking about over here is a shtar where a person is saying what I'm going to give the Chatan and Kala. Ukid Rav Gida Amarav, the name of Gida who said the name of Rav. Rav Gida Amarav. Gida Amarav said, Kama atan noten livnecha. How much the father of the bride would say to the father of the groom, how much are you going to give to your son when he gets married? You know, for a home, for wedding expenses, for this, that. Kach v'kach, he would say such and such, a certain amount. Kama atan noten livnecha, how much are you giving your daughter? Kach v'kach. Amdu v'kidshu kanu. If they then decide to go forward with the kiddushin, the act of the kiddushin actually becomes an act of acquisition. These are examples of things that become hayav even just by speech. So let's say I say, listen, I'm very interested in this shidduch for our children. I'm going to give $20,000 for the wedding. I'm going to give $50,000 for an apartment. If I just say that and then we go ahead and do the act of kiddushin, you're locked in. Because just the words, this is one of the examples.
Deny it. The guy after, if there's nothing in writing, he'll say, I never said that.
Correct. But that doesn't mean you're not hayav.
Yeah, you are.
It's just not enforceable.
Right.
Okay. So what do you see from here? You see from here that there was a shtar that people would often write of psikta, of how much each side agreed to. So it's true that my words would obligate me, but then how could I ever take that money from you in court? You could just deny it. So what would they do? They would write down the amounts that each side had said. Okay? Now, the Gemara says, so you asked, why, let me bring a proof to Shemuel, because it says you could write Kiddushin, and if you're writing Kiddushin, obviously you're giving it. That's assuming that the shtar is a document of Kiddushin. Maybe Shtarei Kiddushin means the document that you were writing before the Kiddushin, indicating how much you're obligated. So therefore, we have no proof that Shemuel's halacha is true, that you're able to do Kiddushin on, or betroth the woman on the holiday, on Chol HaMoed. Okay? By the way, Ashkenazim have this now. What do they call it? Shtar HaTnaim, or they call it the Tnoim. If you ever see by an Ashkenaz wedding, they're breaking a plate.
Right.
What are they doing that for? The custom was that they would read the Shtar HaTnaim, the document with the conditions, and then when it was finished, they would break a plate like a siman, like breaking the glass. But really, when is that document supposed to have been written and signed? Not at the wedding, when they first got engaged. But because we don't have the halachic engagements they used to have now, so they push the Tanaim to the wedding. Sephardim say, what's the point of talking about what you're going to bring to the wedding? We're already at the wedding now. So why are we doing the Tanaim? So Sephardim don't do this shtar psikta, okay? But Ashkenazim still, for the commemoration of it, are still doing it. Let's continue. Says the Gemara, so let's see if there's another way to prove the halakha of Shemuel that says that we're able to obligate ourselves. Says the Gemara, let's prove it. En nos'in nashim b'moed. You're not allowed to marry a woman on Chol Moed. Lo betulot lo amanot. Not someone who's never been married, and not someone who is been married whose husband has passed away. Lo miyabmim. We also don't do yibum. Mipnei shesimcha hilo. Because it's a tremendous source of joy to get married or to do yibum. So what's the problem? What's the issue with it being joyful? Isn't that a good thing to have on the holiday? The answer is yes, it is. But we already learned before that
Preparation and all.
Sorry?
I mean, it requires a lot of preparation and a lot of work that shouldn't be done during this period.
So then why doesn't the Gemara say that it's a lot of work?
True.
Didn't we say this earlier?
Yeah, we did. Do you remember the answer?
There's already a lot of simcha in the moed, so we don't need to add simcha.
Oh, so close.
We'll be taking away from the simcha.
Excellent. It's taking away. In Ma'arvin, simcha b'simcha. We don't mix one simcha with another simcha. So therefore, on the holiday, we don't want you bringing this other simcha into it because that diminishes from the simcha of the holiday. Okay? Says the Gemara. No. Oh, So if you're telling me that I can't marry them, what does that indicate? That I'm allowed to become engaged to them. If you would have meant that I can't do this or this, then you would have said, "Lo, you don't get married. V'lo miyadmin, v'lo mitarsim."
No engagement.
No engagement. So by the fact that it didn't tell you not to get engaged, what does that tell you? That you're allowed to get engaged on Chol HaMoed. The Gemara says, "Lo mibaye kamer." No. The Torah is telling you, the Mishnah is telling you, "Lo mibaye." What does lo mibaye mean? Lo mibaye means I don't need to say. Lo mibaye le'ares. There's no question to get betrothed. The lo kavid mitzvah. You're not doing a mitzvah, right? That's asur. Ela afilu lisanami. The kavid mitzvah asur. What the Mishnah is telling you is not a this but not this, but rather even this. For sure that if I didn't let you even get married, where there's a mitzvah, what's the mitzvah? To start a family, right? Because that's what kiddushin requires in order to be able to be intimate. Or miyabmin, where there's a mitzvah of yibum. If I didn't allow you to do this on the moed, even if it's a mitzvah, how much more so erusin, which is not yet a mitzvah, that is asur on the moed. The Gemara says, okay, so you're right. So that's also not a proof. Says the Gemara, let's try and find one more proof. Tashma, let's learn. Shmuel said in the yeshiva of Shmuel, me'arsin, a person is allowed to become engaged on Chol HaMoed, but you do not bring her in fully, i.e. get married to her. You do not make a seudat erusin, an engagement party. And you don't also do yibum. Because it's a simcha for him, and we don't want to mix the simachot. Shmamina, we see from here that the Tana Debe Shemuel, the Braita of Shemuel, says, the house of Shemuel says this concept. Now, let's just try and understand one thing. What is this simcha ve'en osin seudat erusin? What is that nikuda? What is that idea? The erusin itself doesn't carry the level of joy of simcha of a wedding or of a yibum, so therefore we allowed it. But if you're going to start throwing massive engagement parties, or you have people who make an engagement party that's like a wedding, so that already is simcha ulo. And once it's simcha ulo, it's already a problem to connect, to do this, what's it called? To do this this party on the holiday of Em Arvim Simcha B'Simcha. Says the Gemara, let's continue. The reason of Shemuel is, you're telling me that the reason is that Shemuel said you're allowed to do this because someone else is going to come and grab her first. Didn't Rabbi Yehuda say the name of Shemuel? Every day a bat kol comes out and says, "Bat ploni leploni." This guy's daughter is going to get married to this guy. So it's already something which is predetermined. It's predestined. Sadeh ploni leploni. This guy is going to have this piece of real estate. So you see, it's from Shamayim already. The guy is what his house is going to be and who his wife is going to be. So what are we worried about when you're telling me if I don't quickly betroth her, someone else is going to get there first? Says Shemuel, no. You know what it means? It doesn't mean that the person is going to go and do an act, a physical act. That's already predestined. But maybe maybe the other person will pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the strength of his prayers will change the heavenly decree and destiny. Shemi kadmenu acher berachamim. Says the Gemara, where do we find that is the case? The Gemara brings a proof of that, but let's end here because the Gemara is going to bring a few different teachings on this idea of prayer changing the outcome of marriage and partners. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen. Amen. Chag Sameach.